Thanks very much for inviting me, and thanks for coming to hear this talk. Just before we actually start the talk, I just wonder if we could get a rough show of hands. How many people here believe in God? Just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. Okay, so I'm preaching to the converted, or non-converted, in case of it. How many people are atheists? Okay. How many people did not raise their hand for either of the first two questions? What was that? Are you an agnostic? Agnostic. Yeah, agnostic. Are you an agnostic? Yeah. Okay. Are you an agnostic? Or just too afraid to say you're an atheist? Okay, so the title of the talk is Born to Believe, Evolution, Psychology and Religion. I want to start off with a working definition of religion. And this is just a working definition. There's whole books written about how we should define religion, so this does not pretend to be a definitive answer. Hopefully it's just good enough to get us through this talk. I'm just borrowing a definition that Dan Dennett provides in his 2006 book, Breaking the Spell, Religion as a Natural Phenomenon. And he defines religion, or provides the following working definition of religion in that book. A religion is a social system, and that's important so we can distinguish it from schizophrenia, whose participants avow belief in and seek the approval of one or more supernatural agents. Okay, now if you look at, the reason I mentioned schizophrenia is because if you look in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, they specifically have to mention in their definition of schizophrenia and related psychiatric phenomena that the delusion is not shared by a great number of people in order to differentiate schizophrenia from religion, because without that clause it's often very hard to do so. Certainly when those forms of schizophrenia don't involve hallucinations but just involve delusions, for example. How do you define a delusion? According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, it's something bizarre, and how do you make sure that it's bizarre? It's because it's not shared by a wide number of people. In other words, as Winston Smith says in 1984, sanity is statistical. The key part of the other key part of religion, of course, is that it involves some kind of belief in and or seeking the approval of or commitment to supernatural agents, by which I mean beings who have intentions, thoughts, and so on, but who are not natural agents that we're accustomed to. They may not have physical bodies and so on. All religions have expensive rituals, and by expensive, what I mean there is something that is not necessarily expensive in money, but is costly in terms of the kind of resources we use up in participating in these rituals. They're costly in terms of time, practice, rehearsal, and so on. They all involve stories about gods or supernatural ancestors, and obligatory practices other than rituals, and taboos or forbidden behaviours. So if we can just stay with that as a rough working definition of religion, it's enough to allow us to sort of begin to think about the history of religion. Now, the history of religion is something that is still a work in progress. It still remains to be, a lot of things are still mysterious. But going back, it's helpful just to give a very rough overview of what we know, sort of starting with the present and working back, just so we can see how ancient it is. So if these numbers down the side here designate years before the present. So between 0, the moment, and 1,000 years ago. In the last 1,000 years we have the life of Guru Nanak, founder of the Sikhism, Martin Luther, Joseph Smith, founder of Mormonism. Then between 1,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago, the life of Muhammad, Then 1,000 years after that, roughly in the next millennium before the present, the life of Zoroaster, the Buddha, Mahavira, Jainism, Confucius, Lao Tzu, Jesus. So you notice that, and then Abraham, David before that, and the Torah. So all the major world religions that have such a powerful force today come from the last couple of thousand years. But if we go before that, we find, there's the earliest Vedas were probably composed in the 4th millennium before the present. Also other religious texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh and so on. Let's see if we can. So, sorry, the earliest Vedas, that would be still in the 3rd millennium. In the 4th millennium, we have Newgrange is built, and Stonehenge begins to take. The 4th millennium, Stonehenge begins to take its final form, and the wooden stones are replaced with wooden posts are replaced with stones. Then Newgrange. If we go further back, around 10,000 years before the present, Stonehenge seems to have had some wooden posts. The settlements in Anatolia, possibly practicing worship in communal shrines, leaving figurines behind them. And then around 12,000 years ago, the first cities, states, kingdoms begin to emerge, and the first organised religions emerge as a response to the social, economic and political changes brought about by agriculture. And the advent of agriculture is such a hugely important transition in human history, the most important transition by any reckoning, that I've indicated that by the change of colour there. But of course those organised religions didn't come from nowhere. Those organised religions must have come from, so they didn't spring out of nothing. They probably came from older forms of folk religion that still shared the main characteristics that we talked about: expensive rituals, stories about gods and supernatural beings and ancestors and so on, taboos. But they probably lacked very clear hierarchies. And that seems to be one of the main differences between folk religions and organised religions, the kind that appear with civilization and agriculture, is this clear hierarchies, and then later, of course, written creeds. But before then we have these more folk religions. Maybe there's some differentiation between shamans and others, although the shaman isn't necessarily part of a hierarchy like a priest is. But before